All right. Hi, friends. My name is Emily, and welcome back to my channel. If you're on the live, do say hello in the chat. And if you're here on the replay, this is session 3 of 6. This year, we are exploring the haunted house together. In episode 1, we talked about The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson as sort of a foundation. And then in episode 2, we talked about Helen Oyeyemi's White is for Witching. The playlist for this video series is linked in the description box down below. Today, we're talking about the 1986 J-horror novel, The Graveyard Apartment. So this is by Mariko Koike, and it's translated from the Japanese by Deborah Boliver Boehm. And so once again, like the previous 2 episodes in this series, I do intend for these to stand alone. So we'll talk a little bit about the book, and then at the end, we'll talk about all 3 books, sort of making comparisons. So, content warnings for this book. One of the characters off page does unalive themselves, and there is quite a bit of death surrounding this book. And so we're also going to move from no spoilers to full spoilers. So if you can keep the chat appropriate, the comments appropriate, I guess, if you're watching on the replay, yeah, I would appreciate that. Okay, so I also have a disclaimer. And that is, unlike a lot of the horror books that we've touched on that are in the Western canon, they have their roots in European folklore, which I'm a little bit more familiar with through school. I have no literary or educational background here, no knowledge of Japanese history or folklore or anything that might be influencing the text in terms of a literary legacy. And I did think about, I briefly entertained the idea of doing a crash course in that, and decided not to. It was just too much. So what I think will be interesting instead is to approach this sort of as an outsider with none of the references, genuinely, and to look at how the haunted house is appearing across cultures, what is sort of at the core of maybe what is scary for humans, what is at the core of a ghost story as we do this. So if you're here, let me know. Did you read this? Have you read this before? And if it was your first read, what did you think of it? So this was a first read for me. I encountered it when putting together this book club list, and I just thought the premise sounded fun, and I liked the idea of looking at the haunted house in a different space. And then as I was looking into this book, I kept hearing about J-horror, this term J-horror. Again, not super familiar with J-horror, Japanese horror, but I have seen some of those classic J-horror films like The Grudge, and so I do think this novel has a similar vibe to those films, similar themes, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, the experience of coming to this novel in 2023 versus when it was released in the 1980s. So I'd also love to know what folks think about the writing. Keeping in mind that this is translated fiction, right? So we're not getting, I don't know, the original flavor, the intended flavor, and I can't, because I don't read Japanese, I can't find the original translation of this book and compare. But I'd love to know. Hi, Victoria and Lydia. It's nice to see you folks. What did you think of this book? Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Oh my gosh, is there a huge delay on the chat? That could be interesting. Can I fix that now? Possibly not without breaking everything. Okay. I will just be aware of that. So what did you think of the writing? Like, even with keeping in mind that it's translated fiction, I found this challenging and not a very compelling read. And I would love it if somebody's like, oh my gosh, this is my new favorite book ever. But when I posted about this on Instagram, somebody commented that they tried to read the book before and it just didn't engage them, and they wished me luck. They hoped that I had better luck with it. And unfortunately, I saw that like way after I'd finished the book, and I was like, oh, maybe it's just me. But like, I found the first 2/3 of this book so hard to get into, like unbelievably difficult. And I appreciate, on the one hand, that this novel is building suspense, and so it can't be like as quick as I want it to be, maybe. But it just took a long time to get there. So Lydia in the chat, I'm glad you liked it. Okay. Lydia in the chat has mentioned that she's never unnerved by books, but this did unnerve me. I'm glad. I'm so glad. Amanda says that there were parts that they liked, but they found it really hard to, or they found it hard to get really engaged with the writing. And that's sort of my experience. Like, I'm glad that it worked for folks, but I feel like if I were reading this for like no other reason than I just picked it up, I probably wouldn't have pushed to finish it. Because like the 2/3 of the book, it's so like the last third of the book, I think is great. And if the whole book were like the last third, I feel like this would be like a maybe a 5-star book. But it's just that slow, and I think it's deliberate, the slow, deliberate climb to that third of the book, the last third of the book, that I really struggled with. I feel like the writing was a little bit clunky. And again, I'm not sure if that comes down to translation. Like I can't cite it off the top. I didn't find it again, but I do remember at some point they were doing something and the translator made a choice to be like explain the cultural practice, or like they're eating like a meal and he was like, this is or she was just like, this is a type of food, or like whatever. There's just some interesting translation choices, I feel like. And then there were some moments in the writing where I feel like either the translator or the author, again, I can't speak to which, the text, let's say the text doesn't trust us to get it. So like, we learn that the elevator doesn't go down to the bottom floor. And then when Misao meets Aiko flat out states, quote, "Is it just me, or is the design of this building kind of weird? I mean, they went to the trouble of building a basement, but they didn't bother to include a staircase. The only way to get there is by taking the elevator. I mean, what if there was a power failure or the elevator broke down? How would someone who happened to be in the basement get back upstairs? They'd be stranded down there. It really makes no sense." And that's on page 30. And it's one of those moments where you're like, yes, it does make no logical sense when building a building to only get there via like an electronic device, right? Like, I think it's just a weird choice. And the only reason to not have the stairs go to the basement is for the plot, right? Like and so the novel is like, oh, like, yeah, this is weird. Like, it doesn't make any sense in the context of modern building design or any building design, because old buildings would only have stairs, probably. And so the novel points it out, like, yeah, this is weird, but I need it to be weird for the plot to work. So yeah, I liked the ending, but it felt a little bit difficult. And so because this is a video that will live on the internet, if anybody who stumbles across this video in the future has read the Japanese version, what do you think of the writing? Like, let us know in the comments, what style of writing is this? Like, does it fit in with other like horror suspense texts that it's contemporary with? Is it the difference between like reading Stephen King, who's like a poppy mass market type of writer, compared to like Shirley Jackson, right? Like, is that sort of the clunkiness that I'm feeling? Let's go back to the chat here. Victoria says that they like the build-up, the setting, and how it reflects on the people. That people will ignore red flags in order to keep the peace or to be in comfort in their decisions, no matter if it is a mistake or not. Oh, interesting. You feel like the ending was kind of a mess and felt rushed. Interesting, because I feel like the ending, it definitely speeds up, but I feel like the ending is probably my favorite part of this book. I love that. So many different opinions right off the bat. Not to get too much into like a literary history that I don't have any expertise in, but in terms of like J-horror, Japanese horror, it's sort of like a 1980s thing, and it tends to opt more for psychological terror, suspense, and supernatural horror and ghosts. Apparently, one of the dominant features of this is a vengeful ghost and the breakup of the nuclear family. And I think we sort of have both of these here, right? Like, in terms of a breakup of a nuclear family, you have the husband, Teppei, who has an affair. He is married to a very like traditional, he describes her as traditional, serene woman. And he decides to have an affair with a coworker, and in doing so breaks that like traditional bond of marriage. Like, he's broken a trust, broken this family unit that they were working on building. And I think you can see it causes tension in like his extended family. Like, his brother has never really warmed up to his new sister-in-law, and doesn't acknowledge her with the proper language. So I thought I think that fits, right? I think it fits with the genre, or at least one of the genre conventions. And then in terms of ghosts, haunting, vengeful spirits, I think 100% that is this book, right? And so one of the things that I'm curious about, because some of the classics of J-horror have made it to North America, have made it to like more Western European influenced countries, I am curious, because this is a relatively new translation of a 30-year-old book. And the like J-horror tradition of the 1980s is something that we're probably familiar with if we're horror readers, right? Like, we've probably seen The Ring or The Grudge. And we have a sense of this. So I'm curious if when this, and again, this is just sort of a wish, right? Like, if you, as you stumble across this on the internet, on the replay, if you are somebody who encountered this in the 80s, does it, like, do you think it still lives up 30 years later? Lydia in the chat has gone back to like the mention of the writing. And she says that the pacing of the book felt very intentional, a slow buildup and a rushing at the end to help allow the reader to feel the frantic urgency the family was feeling. I do think that makes sense in terms of like the writing and the plot and the like the situation that we have by the end. Okay, so something that I do feel slightly more confident to speak on is the setting and the history of graveyards in Japan. As I don't know if anybody else is into Caitlin Doughty, Deathlings, but so sorry, this is a very like brain foggy day, but we're gonna try. I would love to know what folks thought about the setting of this apartment building, surrounded by graveyards with like a little Buddhist temple. Like, what did you think of this? I really, really liked it. I feel like, and especially that it's an apartment building, it's a step away from the sort of gothic manor houses that we've seen in Hill House and White is for Witching that have been passed down generationally, picking up bad vibes. This is a new build, and nobody has ever really lived in it. So it's not like it's picked up the bad vibes of previous owners. And I don't know, an apartment, it makes me think of like The Shining and like the hotel as sort of a space that brings together a lot of different people who are all at different places in their lives. Maybe this is their permanent home. Maybe it's a lily pad on the way to like their dream home. Like an apartment feels like it's a little more alive with the community than like the gothic manor houses that we've seen. And it's it's a lot of places, it's a lot of people's like first homes. Like the first thing that you do before you buy a house is you move into an apartment, right? It's kind of a big deal. And so I like the idea that this is a place that this new family, right? Victoria in the chat has just mentioned that the nuclear family is created out of breaking up of the traditional old one, right? So it's this like fresh start to start their new little nuclear family, and they have the kid and the dog and, you know, this beautiful new house. And in any other circumstances, an apartment building should be a really great place to have like a community. But we know that this dream for community is at the expense of the final resting place of various dead bodies, right? And it's interesting because I knew that cremation was popular in Japan. I knew that there was I think it was Caitlin Doughty who mentioned that cremation rates are so high because population is so high and land is so limited, and it's like part of Buddhist tradition. And so like the current emperor and empress have said that they will be cremated instead of buried because there's no space in like the royal cemetery or wherever they would traditionally be buried, right? Like this has a long history of of not burying bodies. And I think it's interesting because I would say that it is not uncommon in Canada to have houses that back onto graveyards. Like just, yes, somebody mentioned it here about both people have mentioned it here, the legend of like holding your breath as you pass a graveyard. Like it's so common that it's like a road trip car game to like count the cows, and when you drive past a graveyard, you lose all your cows. Or you hold your breath when you go past the graveyard, like as a superstitious little kids thing, right? Like they're very common. It's not uncommon to live next to them. In the town that I grew up in, like there was a public park with a graveyard like right above it. And so it was a natural way to like walk to friends' houses from the park was to go through the graveyard, like very, very common. But if graveyards are not that common where you live, like if it is not a cultural norm to bury your dead, then it would be, I imagine, like extra weird for this family and for anybody in this building, right? If you think about how many times it comes up, them like justifying to themselves, like, this place is so affordable, it's so close to the city, it's so close to the school. Like we lucked out with this beautiful big modern apartment. It's just that our neighbors are dead, right? Like it makes sense, I feel like, that this would have like an extra sort of ick factor to it, like an extra freakiness, to use Lydia's words from the chat. And so I did do a little bit of historical research. So in the 19th century, there was a government, a Japanese government, that attempted to ban cremation, along with the Buddhist tradition of cremation. There was like with the shift in government, an attempt to shift sort of like religious practices. And so there was a brief period where cremation was banned and everybody was being buried. And then, shockingly, money. It was money that changed things, right? The finance ministry realized that urban graveyards are a waste of valuable land because you really can't tax dead people. It's a much more revenue-inducing thing, revenue-creating thing to like put houses and businesses on your limited land. And so full body burial was banned in Tokyo city limits, and then less than 2 years after that initial ban, it was repealed. And so I wonder if, like, we're thinking the 19th century, right? Like this graveyard would be, I'm imagining, one of these graveyards that happened, right? In this like unique historical window, and that it's affecting the ability to create density. Like one of the things that comes up in this novel is this building was like the first step in building this community. They have the underground connection to the train station they want to build with like the little shopping center so that you can go from your condo into this underground shopping center, and it leaves so much space for everybody to be this really dense, vibrant community. And this graveyard is this graveyard not from the 80s, this graveyard with more historical roots, is causing a problem. So I think we're seeing in the chat here a little bit of like, yeah, graveyards are kind of weird. It's like you have to face your mortality whenever you see them. But I don't know if it's the same level of freaked outness that like this family and the people in the building are experienced, just because of how like unique it would be to have your neighbors be rotting corpses. And like Miyaso shudders at the thought at one point that if they had gone through and built this connector to the next city, to the next train station, that like they would have been under where the bodies are buried. And so like there would literally be like dead people above you as you were just going about your life and your shopping, and how unsettling that would be. Going back to the chat, Victoria's mentioning the sense of emptiness in the apartment freaked her out more than the graveyard, and that there are more bodies in the graveyard than the apartment. Yeah, definitely. Even if your neighbors weren't even if I guess your neighbors weren't a graveyard, weren't dead bodies, just being alone, feeling very disconnected from community, that sense of isolation. I wonder to what degree that would influence sort of superstitious thinking, like extra put you on edge because there's nobody there to support you. There's no like backup. There's no like real sense of community. And as more and more people get freaked out and move away, that like safety in numbers starts to disappear too. So I feel like one of the things that this book did really well is the setting, right? Is setting this really unsettling place, this atmosphere of sort of constantly being on edge, feeling uncomfortable, feeling disconnected. And I really like that about this. So if we want to go sort of light spoilers, I would like to talk about the characters. So if, and again, I would love to hear other opinions on this. I feel like the setting is the strongest part of this novel. I found the characters quite bland and like they're morally gray and inoffensive and bland in the way that real people are kind of generally bland and inoffensive. Like your average person is do you know what I mean? Morally gray. Like nobody's perfect. Nobody's. I want to say Beyonce, but you know what I mean? Like not every person is going to be Beyonce. And so like these people are just sort of being normal, morally gray humans living their lives, trying to do like the day-to-day stuff. I found the side characters more interesting than the family. I thought like the quirky, I don't even know what to call him. The guy who like puts his hands on the elevator and like uses his mind to open it. I would love to know more about that guy. Or like the escort who spends all of her time like out of the building getting drunk because like she can't be in this home, she can't be in this apartment that she's bought, right? I felt bad for the little kid. I felt bad for the dog. I think the most interesting character for me, I think, is the dead first wife. So we just to talk about a few of the characters who I think have important roles in like the plot in terms of what's happening. We have Tepe, the husband slash father, and so he had an affair. And then he married that woman, Miyaso, who we're following now in this book. She's the one who starts to get like a little bit unsettled, a little bit bad vibes, right? With that dead pet bird to begin with. And he has a strained relationship with his brother because of this affair, but he got to keep his job. So him cheating on his wife, which resulted in the wife unaliving herself, hasn't really had a huge impact on his career. Whereas Miyaso, the second wife and the mother who we're following throughout this book, who I feel bad for. Like, she had an affair with her coworker Tepe. She left their shared space of work to raise their child and to become a homemaker, a stay-at-home wife and a mother. And only at the start of this story, with her kids starting kindergarten, does she have the opportunity to go back to her work, back to her career. She picks up odd jobs, and she mostly like makes a home and feels kind of, I feel like her life is beige. Like it's kind of boring. She's gotten stuck. And I feel deeply sad for her because it seems like the affair and the resulting unaliving of the first wife is sort of the reason that like they got together. and they stayed together. Like, imagine deciding that Tepe isn't worth it, but you ruined Reiko's life, right? Like, it's just such a weird relationship, and I feel really badly for her. Just going to the chat here. Lydia says, I think she felt more connected to the main character, but overall was kind of meh character-wise. Lydia also says that I think the everyday kind of people help sell the unnerving feelings I felt, like the situation could happen to anyone. True, that they are regular everyday people that you could easily imagine like this happening in your neighbor's house, because it's just so, like, they're so unremarkable. Like, you wouldn't suspect that the person illustrating for your magazine is experiencing like a haunting. I do. So Victoria in the chat has asked if we think Naomi, the obnoxious sister-in-law, comes off as someone foreign from Japan, even as somebody from the States. I'm glad I'm not the only one. Like, I felt like she is so different in terms of her manners and her behavior. Like, especially because the brother-in-law, what is his name? Tatsuji? The brother-in-law really like admired Reiko and seemed to admire her for being so traditional. I think it's interesting that she's just so like over the top, kind of obnoxious. And yes, Lydia has pointed out that she would be an influencer for Britain today. Totally. She would be running around with like her cell phone in the basement being, well, probably just recording videos to post later because she wouldn't be able to live stream. But she'd be recording videos for the inevitable like vlog that she would make about like the worst day ever, moving out my in-laws, and like when the shit hits the fan, I can fully picture her like vlogging it. You're totally right. Yeah, she doesn't seem to quite fit in terms of the family. And I don't know, maybe that's just the brother-in-law picking somebody so different, like maybe like a trauma reaction, because he liked the first sister-in-law so much that he's like, well, that didn't work out. Maybe you got to veer completely off and find somebody who wouldn't unalive themselves. So I think Reiko is she's the character that I find the most interesting. Specifically because I'm not really sure what to do with the entity in this building. And I would love folks' input on this at the end. But at the beginning, on page 14, we learn that in her suicide note, that she says that she, quote, harbored no ill feelings whatsoever towards him, Tepe, or the woman he was having an affair with. She was just tired. Life no longer offered her anything to enjoy, and all she wanted to do was to sleep forever. Goodbye, she concluded. Please be happy. And again, that's page 14. So on the one hand, on the next page, page 15, they talk about how like there's no way for them to get around the fact that their selfish actions had driven another human being to end their own life. But also in this note, she's saying like, I just want you to be happy. Like, I can't imagine recovering from this. This has broken her heart in such a way, broken her spirit in such a way. Debatably, like her understanding of herself, if she truly is like this old-fashioned type of woman, right? We're told that she's somebody who radiates an aura of quiet, differential serenity. And she seems to be this embodiment of a womanly ideal on page 40. Like if her identity is so tied up in her marriage and her role as like a homemaker, like what a failure that must have felt like, right? And so for her to continue to be this very like serene, ideal person, to be like, I want you to be happy, but I can't deal with this. Goodbye. I find her character is the one that I'm still thinking about. That and the dog. I think about Cookie a little bit. Maybe I'm just a terrible person. But I think about the dog and that the dog is stuck in this building. Yeah, I feel there are characters that I don't know that we're meant to spend this much time thinking about because they're really not there on page. But it's the unalived wife that is haunting me. And I think debatably, literally, we have to talk about literally, but definitely figuratively haunts the relationship in this book, right? Like it's impacted every area of their lives, right? So I do want to move into full spoilers because I feel like the ending and like the haunting bits of this novel that come about that are kind of like spoilery, like for a horror suspense novel, you want to experience these moments for yourself. But I want to talk about them. So at this point, I would like to, if you're interested in reading this book, that's your warning. But yeah, we're going to talk spoilers. So first of all, I think the first like incident that I find really hard to ignore is the weasel wind. So when the kids are playing in the basement and there's like all of a sudden the elevator doesn't work, they're locked in the basement. It's just enough for like the one kid to go upstairs and be like, hey, she's cut herself and she's bleeding really badly. And then they can't get into the basement. Like at that moment, they finally get the kids out. Again, that's the guy with the hands, magic hands on the elevator, gets the elevator up to the next floor. And they go to the hospital and they're just like, yeah, it's like a cut. Like, there's nothing in the basement. Like, there's nothing she cut herself on. It's a weasel wind. And like the hoops that you would have to jump through. Like the dead bird, all right. The kind of like uncomfortable feeling, the shadow on the television could just be like something weird in the signal. Like there's so many other things that I feel like are very easy to brush off. But like the weasel wind, like the cutting of their daughter by seemingly nothing in the basement. I think it's the father too, who's like, nope, that's got to be the only reasonable explanation, right? Like that he has to see it for himself. Like when he and the caretakers go down into the basement, yes, medical gaslighting, that he has to see it for himself. Whatever like thing, entity is down there. It felt really shitty. I felt really bad for the mom in that moment. And then we have that moment with like all of the handprints, right? When everybody has slowly been leaving the building and the caretakers are finally ready to leave the building. And we see all of these ghostly handprints on the door, keeping the door shut. And then finally they're allowed to leave. And our family that we're following, they have that like series of misadventures with finding a home. And it feels so cruel, like whatever entity is trying to keep them in this building, whatever spirits are trying to keep them in this building, like the little house that they like burns down, the second apartment that they weren't so keen on but signed anyway, like the woman in that building dies under mysterious circumstances, and so her apartment has to be sealed off and like it can't be let or rented, sorry. Like I feel like, again, it's this like speeding up. Like once we hit this point, things start to feel like less ignorable. And like at a certain point, there were parts where I was wondering, like, why did you go back? Like, you know, this is not working out for you. Why would you even try and re-enter this building? Like, just cut your losses. But again, I guess that's not a rational human being thing to do. Naturally, you would try and pack up your belongings and move your life elsewhere. And so finally, we have the in-laws trapped. We've mentioned the in-laws. We have the in-laws who've come to help them move. And at this point, they're kind of like, yeah, just not right for us. Like, they're just sort of giving like halvesy excuses. They haven't mentioned that the building is like cursed and full of evil spirits. And then they all get trapped. And like that, as that unfolds, that was so, I don't know, exciting after so much of like this slow preamble to be like, it's hot in here. We can't open the windows. We can't open any of the windows. They can't open the door. The power's cut. Like slowly things just start to go. Like the phone line. They're throwing like little notes off the roof of the building to try and warn people and like try and get help. And the building vaporizes those people. Like it goes from like, ooh, spooky shadow on the television to vaporizing people outside the building. Like the building's like, hell no, you're not leaving. And I loved it. And like the protein bars, the minute that like the elevator was mentioned, like, gee, wouldn't it suck to get stuck in this basement? And also like, hey, isn't it weird that like these super caloric bars are still in the basement? Like I was waiting for both of those things to come back. I feel like the ending where we have no hope for their survival is just so like we don't have to watch it. And it's almost more effective that we don't have to watch it. Like it's not a like gruesome body horror, like gore and guts moment. It's just the entity has eaten the brother and sister when they go beyond the wall. And then the entity is like slowly riding up the elevator. Oh, it was so good. Like, I love that I am left to imagine, right? And so some of the things that I would love to hear folks' thoughts on is like, what is this entity, right? Like, I strongly feel like it's not the first wife, Raiko. If other folks feel like it is Raiko, I would love to know. I feel like Raiko is well within her right to be a vengeful spirit, but I feel like it's not in her character based on what we've been told about her. But I saw a number of articles and Goodreads reviews framing this as like, vengeful spirit of a woman scorned tortures nuclear family, holds them hostage in the building. And I don't know if that's true, right? Okay, sorry, going to the chat. So Victoria has mentioned that another term for weasel wind is kamaitachi. which is yokai, which is a yokai who controls the wind. Yokai are supernatural or unaccountable phenomena that haunt tenants of their own homes. Ooh. Okay, so this is the part where my lack of like Japanese folklore is showing. So if this is like a part of folklore that sort of like exists, is like an accepted part of folklore, as an entity that exists to haunt tenants of their own home, that I feel like makes more sense. And I almost feel like weasel wind, I almost wish the translator had left Kamaitachi. My pronunciation is awful, I'm sorry. Because I probably would have Googled that, whereas weasel wind, I just sort of accepted. So yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And you've also, Victoria has also mentioned that she thinks it's less about who the entities are than it is about what the entities represent. It's about this beige life each character is experiencing, consuming them in this apartment. Ooh. Okay. Sorry, taking a minute to percolate that. Interesting. I like it. I really like it. Lydia has mentioned in the chat, it felt like many entities, like a group from the graveyard. It didn't feel like the dead wife. I was sort of more on Lydia's wavelength there, feeling like the ghosts of these people who were disturbed in the building of this project, that first of all, they had this thing, their burial, their death ritual of cremation was not allowed. They had this like government enforced death ritual that maybe they weren't down for because Buddhism says cremation is what you should do. And so, you know, if any of these spirits were buried in this, like, I'm sure still like lovingly like tended ceremony, but not maybe what they wanted for themselves, right? And then to have that, like, the graveyards just sort of ripped up, right? So like it's not the death that they wanted, it's not the death ritual that they wanted, and that was government enforced. And then it's government being greedy and saying, well, actually, we want that land back so we can tax it, right? Like, how frustrating, right? To be laid to rest in a way that is not typical and then uprooted from this like final resting place, all because of like silly government politics things, right? Like, that's where I was wondering, like, that would be a reason to be angry, a bunch of spirits to be angry, right? And so to take it out on the family in this building or the people in this building felt reasonable. If the building's abandoned, then like their final resting place was disturbed for no reason. The other thing I was wondering is, like, can they in some way interact with Raiko? Are they able to sort of sense that these people have done something really morally gray, something maybe that they feel they deserve to be punished for, and they're just sort of drawing this like negative energy to themselves because they feel guilty, right? Like, they wanted to try and have this like happy nuclear family, but they feel guilty about it, and they like moved, they've started fresh, they're trying to move on, and like maybe just their own, like the weird start to their relationship and the guilt that they must feel around that is drawing people to them, right? Just going to the chat here for a minute. Victoria has mentioned it could be a different entity taking on the form of Raiko to torture the husband. I love that. Except for the fact that I wish he could let, like, if it's interesting that the building is punishing everybody, because it does seem like the husband is the most at fault. Like, he should have ended his relationship if he wanted to pursue Miyaso, instead of betraying her, right? So like the husband feels the most at fault to me. But yeah, I like this too. That so Lydia has mentioned like maybe Raiko showed up as a warning, and that if Victoria's gone on to point out that like if she is the epitome of the perfect submissive wife, she probably would come back to warn him. Yeah, so maybe like the like watchful figure in the TV, sort of like a, hey, there's something weird here, right? Like maybe the more gentle haunting aspects, like the feather, the bird's feather, as like a, yep, this is real, is the wife warning of like all of the bad energy that's been disturbed in this building, all of the unhappy spirits that were angry about this construction, angry about the people. Yeah, I love it. And I love that we don't super have a clear answer. It's just sort of left. I mean, I feel like it's not in Raiko's character, but she's probably well within her rights to decide in the afterlife. She's heckin' pissed, right? Like she's pissed. Look at them starting this new life and this brand new apartment building and like still working a job and like having a kid, and she's missed out on all of that. I could buy, like, I don't think it's in her character, but I think I would understand if it was. Does that make sense? Okay. So also just a moment to revel in like the foolishness of the brother and Naomi when like mysterious hole appears in like spooky basement of the building that you've been boxed into, and they're like, we're fucking going through the hole in the wall. Don't know where it goes. Like, even if it got them out of the building, you would think that there wasn't like a tunnel somewhere connecting to like a subway station that like eventually I feel like it has to be bricked up on the other end. Like, even if it weren't a like hellish road to nowhere, it can't have been like a reasonable way out of the building either, right? So Lydia is mentioning that that's why she liked this book so much, that it leaves so much open. And that, oh, you changed your rating higher after you sat with it for a while. I love that. I'm so glad that you liked this book. I will say that like this conversation about the book and like some of my questions has been, once again, like talking about the book is always interesting and like enlightening, because like I sit here by myself and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that, right? So I love this. I love all of these different perspectives on the motivations, you know? It's great. So because we're sort of building this, what is a haunted house? Like, what do people fear? What sort of commonalities can we find? We have like a list from The Haunting of Hill House and White is for Witching of things that we're seeing over and over again, or things that we think we might see over and over again. And I wanted to bring like a compare and contrast of like some of the big ones that we've seen in the first two books, and maybe chat through things that we think are similar or things that like are more unique to this book. And so one of the ones that came up in the first two books is the house being personified, the building in which all of the spooky shit is happening is personified. It becomes a character. It becomes a woman. I don't think that this building is a character. I would love to know how other folks feel. To me, this very much felt like spirits in a building, but the building itself was not like alive or like manipulating people. Like in White is for Witching, we have scenes where the house is actively trying to kill people and like keep them trapped. Whereas I feel like because we can see the hands on the like windows and doors of the building, like holding them closed, it feels like the spirits are using the building like a tool. The building is more of a tool. Sorry, Lydia's just mentioned that in the chat. Then like the building itself being bad to the bone. Like a lot of these houses that we've seen in the other books, like the Hill House, it's constructed by like an unwell mind, and the unwellness of the builder is reflected in like how everything is slightly off, slightly wonky, like doors slam shut because the building is all tilted and angly and you can't look out a window and see what you think you should see because of how like not square or typical the building has been built. This very much feels like a regular new build building. Yes, so Victoria has mentioned in the chat that she feels like the spirits are not able to fix the situation, so they're taking out their frustration on those who step into their territory. Yes, that the building is like their place now. Like if you disturbed their graves, you took away their final resting place, then this is theirs. Like don't touch it. Like don't come into this space. Right? So yeah, I think this is our first, just a regular building, a haunted building, but just a regular building. Something else that we've seen in the first two books is a descent into madness. Typically, it's our female protagonist who we watch descend into madness, to the point where we're not sure if, like, it's equally plausible that the character is experiencing some sort of mental break or is experiencing something supernatural, right? Like, I think by the end of Hill House and the end of White is for Witching, you could fairly safely argue either way and have legs to stand on. Like, I'm not sure if this book does that, right? Like, things seem off. The wife and the women in the building do recognize that things seem off. Like there's a bad smell in the basement. But they're also within the realm of the real enough that they can like brush it off if they really try not to think about it. But I feel like nobody here is questioning their sanity in the way that other characters have, right? Like they've all fully bought in. Like once they recognize that there's something deeply wrong happening in the building, they all like sort of acknowledge that It's not like, hopefully you're just crazy. Like, right? Like, and I kind of appreciate that because it seems like women in horror texts often get sidelined as being sick or like mentally unwell. And like, we're debating about that for quite a chunk of the novel. I just want to jump here to the chat. Lydia has mentioned that a common theme throughout these books is how emotion, original entities affect the future of the buildings and the homes. Yeah, okay, I'm going to add that to the list. Because I want to see, we'll track it. House personified. Emotions. How did you phrase this? Because I love this. Emotions, original entities. Affect at home. Okay. Yeah, that's true. And it's true for the other books too, I think. That like the deep sadness, the like weird parental relationship of Hugh Crane with his children, those bad emotions carry forward. In White is for Witching, we have the deep racism of the grandparent that's been passed down and like that trauma carrying forward. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. So Victoria has said, I would like to add how the hopes of these tenants and their dynamics are destroyed through the invasion of their fears and how they are unable to handle said fears. Yeah, that we have a how do I want to phrase this? I think that's true too for White is for Witching and for Haunting of Hill House. That it's like a fear really taking over. Yes. Okay. Unusual floor plan. If we have a bingo card, maybe I'll make a bingo card. If we have a bingo card, I feel like unusual floor plan would be on here, but it's a little bit of a stretch, and that's the elevator. That the elevator and the fact that there's only a front door, like there's only one door in and out of this building. It's like an 8-floor apartment building. There's no back door. Like, I don't think I've ever been in a modern constructed building that doesn't have at least 2 exits for like fire safety. This was a building built in the 80s. So like, that's a little bit weird. It's like a controlling of the exits. And then also the fact that there's no stairs to the basement. Unusual floor plan. That one's a stretch. I feel like it's definitely not like Hill House and White is for Witching, where there are, I don't know, Hill House feels like a maze, like it's intentionally trying to keep people in and lock them in. That what is it? How do we phrase this before? Hospitality. It's like an insistent hospitality. I don't think this building has that insistent hospitality in its weird floor plan. And then isolation. I think, without a doubt, across all 3 books, there is isolation. And the fears, we've talked a little bit about how being isolated can increase your fear. Having that lack of community support increases the fear. It increases, I guess, your paranoia too. Like, and this family is isolated in so many ways. Like, they've become isolated from their coworkers. We don't really hear about friends. The mother, I think it's Miyaso has a phone call with one of her parents, and it's like a really strained relationship. They're really disappointed that she would have an affair with a married man. So like there's a strained relationship with the family. And then you think about where Aiko and her family go. They have a room, a flat to stay with their family. So they don't have to sit around in this building waiting for a place to lease within their budget. They can just leave. They could literally like, we've had enough, we're packing up and we're leaving. Because they have a place to go, because they have a closeness with their family, where it seems like neither of the adults in this family have that connection with their family to be like, hey, we're needing a place to live. Our house is uninhabitable. While we look for something in our budget, can we live in your spare room? Right? Like, they're isolated in that way. Again, they don't appear to have friends to visit, to stay with, to have them support like the weirdness of this building and like rationalize that this is weird, that maybe they wouldn't have even moved to this place if they had closer ties, right? If they were like, oh yeah, this place is really affordable, maybe they would have had their family be like, yeah, there's a reason for that. What about the resale value of this property? Like, I know that that was a big thing when I was looking to buy a house. That was one of the big things that like my parents had a huge concern with, was like, yes, you can afford to live in this area, but will you ever be able to leave this area? Will you ever be able to sell this house? So maybe if they weren't as isolated, they would have had somebody be like, this isn't a good idea. Like, spend your budget elsewhere. And then, of course, they're close to the city, but they're not in the city. There's nobody in this building. Apartment buildings are ideally little community spaces. They don't have that. And then all of their neighbors are dead. So isolated, unless people are coming to visit the graves, or I guess I'm probably not having funerals anymore, but if they're visiting their family. But again, you're not going to walk up to people who are sad and remembering their loved ones and be like, oh, hi, I'm your neighbor. So yeah, like the isolation is just awful. Hi, Ross. You've jumped in right at the end here. So yeah, I feel like things that are unique to this that we haven't seen in other places would be an interesting thing to build as well. I feel like I don't know if the fear of like just the unusualness of a graveyard is something that we're going to come across again. Like the setting itself, I think, is going to be unique. I can't think, I've read a couple of the other books, and I can't think of anyone specifically having like such a closeness to a memento mori, like this constant reminder of death that would put you on edge. So I think that's going to be unique to this, like as a cause of fear and tension. Family has been important, not necessarily the nuclear family, but family relationships for sure have been important in these books. The Hill House had that weird parental relationship. White is for Witching has the like passing down of trauma manifesting in the eating disorder for each of the women, right? Like there's something with the family in each one. And I feel like here we have a break of the nuclear family. And then like somebody mentioned, was it Victoria or Lydia, who mentioned in the chat that there was a break of what would have been a nuclear family, a recreation of this nuclear family. And by the end, we have it fall apart again. It's destroyed. It's going to be destroyed. So yeah, family has, can add that to my list just for myself, because I'm going to be looking at these notes for the next one as well. I'm trying to think of anything else. If there's anything that folks want to comment on at this point, we're hitting the 1.5 hour mark. I have reached the end of my notes. I just have like the outro promo for next time. So if while I'm doing that, folks want to leave any final thoughts on this book, like overall, would you recommend it, and who would you recommend it to? Like, can you think of another title like this that, like, if you're into X, you'll love this? I would love that for just a resource for this video if you did like this book. So, the shameless self-promo. The next in this series, the 4th installment in this series, we're going to be looking at Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a wee novel, and I am excited because it's always nice to have like a little quick read in the summer. So we're going to meet on Tuesday, August 29th for this, again at 7:30 p.m. Toronto time. And just as a little selling point, this is a horror tale about race and America deeply rooted in contemporary Native American experience. And Stephen Graham Jones is a Blackfeet author. And so it's going to delve into his characters' conflicted feelings towards their ancestry, haunted as they are by the ghost of the father whose death severed their ties to the reservation. So I think this will be interesting, just to get another perspective on like a haunted house and like being haunted by something. So I'm very excited for that. And then if you are a patron or if you want to become a patron, this is available to patrons at all tiers in July, on Wednesday, July 26th at 7:30 p.m. Toronto time. The patron exclusive Stephen King book club is reading Eyes of the Dragon. This is a fun one. It's kind of got YA vibes to it. I don't know why I feel like that, but it just feels a little bit younger and lighter. And it's sort of fantasy horror. I mean, it's got dragons on it. I think it might have Randall Flagg in it too, if you're a fan of like the Stephen King universe and like the interconnectedness of things. This might be a fun one to join in for. And so that is available to patrons at all tiers. So yeah, those are the things coming up. And that is all I have. Let's see what's here. Okay, Lydia also can't think of anything else quite like it, but wants to read more if anyone knows anything like this. Victoria is recommending movies like this: Poltergeist, Dark Waters, Evil Dead Rise, High Rise by J.D. Ballard. Thanks, Victoria. That is super helpful. I think, I don't know why, the urge for me for this is to rewatch The Grudge, even though The Grudge is one of like the few horror movies that like actually deeply disturbed me, deeply unnerved me. I have this like desire to go rewatch it now. So yeah, those are some great recommendations, some great watching, even if it's just for like a similar vibe to this story. I really appreciate that. Alrighty, folks, as we hit the 2-hour mark of having the door shut in this office, it is very hot. I am going to go and have some water. So I want to thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you for chatting with me. This is a lot of fun. I feel better about this book, like chatting through it. I still don't think it's a new favorite, but I feel better having seen some different perspectives on this. So thank you. If you are watching on the replay, definitely let us know in the comments down below what you thought of this book. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. I will see you soon with some edited content, and I hope everybody has a good evening. Bye.